All right, hello everyone. This is Thomas, and welcome to my channel. I do educational content on this channel. We focus on primarily the esoteric and obscure and miraculous, and we are looking at the reciprocal system of theory. This is, I believe, the 81st video that we've done on the reciprocal system. It is a theory of everything that was derived by Dewey B. Larson back in the 20th century. He died back in 1990, and we're actually looking at his final book that came out posthumously in 1995 called Beyond Space and Time. Now, this is Larson's foray into metaphysics, psychology, religion, philosophy, and it's a departure from his other works, which are primarily hard science, such as astronomy and physics and chemistry. We will get into those works eventually, but for the shorthand version of Larson's system is that that the universe is not made out of matter, and the universe is not made out of energy, but the universe is made out of motion. And motion is the relationship between space and time. And motion is, well, space and time are reciprocals of each other. Kind of meaning that they come together in a fraction, space over time or time over space, but they also come in 3 dimensions. So it can be time to the 3rd power over, space to the 3rd power. That's matter. Time over space is energy. Space over time, we know that to be speed. Space over time to the 2nd power is acceleration. And really all of the scientific quantities, units that are out there are expressible in terms of space and time only. Space and time are reciprocals of each other, that they have the qualities of one are the same as the qualities of the other. Like a reciprocal would be, the reciprocal of 2/3 would be 3/2. They both have that 3 and the 2. They both have those same qualities, but they are inverted. And so space, what we know about space is that it's multi-dimensional, 3-dimensional coordinates, or some might say 4 in tetrahedral coordinates. And then so too, time is also multi-dimensional like that. Time we know to be progressing, always getting later and later. So too, space is progressing. Things are always getting farther and farther apart. And that was seen by the Hubble telescope with the recession of the distant galaxies. All the distant galaxies are moving away from each other in a scalar manner, in a motion that has a magnitude but no direction. Very similar to what you would see if you took a balloon and you put a magic marker, put dots on it with a magic marker, blew up the balloon, all the dots would be moving away from each other. If you sucked in the balloon, all the dots would be moving toward each other. But there would be no specific direction involved in that motion. Okay, then space and time are also quantized, meaning that there is a minimum unit of space and that there is a minimum unit of time. There's no fractional units. And 1 unit of space in 1 unit of time is the speed of light. And the speed of light is the neutral point, or the midpoint of Larson's universe of motion. Unlike Einstein's static universe, where the speed of light is the maximum speed of the universe, in Larson's universe, speed of light is the midpoint, and there is an entire half of the universe that's moving faster than the speed of light. He calls that the cosmic sector, or sector 2. The sector that we're familiar with, sector 1, is the material sector, slower than the speed of light. Over here, that's slower than the speed of light, sector 1. You have space over time relationships. Over here, you have time over space relationships, faster than the speed of light. In order to cross that speed of light boundary, you just invert to figure out what's going on. So if we know what's going on over here, we can extrapolate and figure out what's going on over here. Just invert the roles of space and time. So Larson's theory is fantastic for all of those things. But it really, what it does is it puts the power into your hands. You can figure out, it's a system of theory. You can take this system and apply it to anything and any topic. And you can figure out how things work for yourself. Larson did this with economics. He has a couple of books on economics, so we'll look at where he, took the reciprocal system system and applied it to a subject that, he wasn't all that familiar with, and came out with answers. You could do that with other subjects as well. So you don't have to rely on the white lab coats guys. You don't have to rely on the, the pointy-headed professors out there that are trying to tell you how, and your governments that are trying to tell you what you're supposed to think and trust the science and all that. You can figure it out for yourself. If you figure out how to work the system, you have to just buckle down and become fluent in it. Now, the material sector, or sector 1, grows by aggregation. The particles bond together and glom onto each other up until they get to their most complex level, which Larson says is DNA. A DNA molecule has billions of atoms in it. And at that level of complexity, DNA then becomes eligible to be taken control of by a cosmic entity. A cosmic entity comes and takes control of the material DNA molecule and turns that into the life unit. So a life unit is a combination of a material and cosmic unit. They have to be kind of in the right proportion and in the right configuration. But then the life unit starts from its, most basic level, the one-celled organism, but it builds up in complexity as well through evolution or development, and eventually gets to its most complex level, which Larson says is the intelligent human being. At that point, the intelligent human being becomes eligible to be taken overall control by what Larson calls sector 3. And this is the sector that is actually independent of space and time, outside of space and time. And I would submit that this might have something to do with the boundary, the speed of light. Other people would have called the sector 3 by the names of God or gods or spiritual world. Larson uses sector 3. But sector 3 can control the human being, in which case, sector 3 is in competition then with sector 2, because sector 2 is controlling the human being and guiding it toward survival. But sector 3 is guiding it toward ethical behavior or good behavior. And then so sometimes those two goals are conflicting. And at that time, the human being needs to be able to decide which to choose, and that is what is called free will. And that was a chapter we did a few chapters ago. And then we did a chapter on right and wrong, and then we did a chapter on good and evil. Now we're up here into chapter 20, which is called the moral objective. And we just started this a few minutes ago, video time-wise. And he was talking about how there's a big category of morally neutral things that are not part of really sector 3. They're really sector 2 things, happiness and unhappiness. Happiness is desirable and unhappiness is undesirable, but in themselves, both are morally neutral. They are part of our inheritance as aggregates of material substances, sector 2, and well, that's sector 1, and as products of biological evolution, sector 2. And skipping a few quotes that he puts in, abundant evidence corroborating this theoretical conclusion that emerges from our scientific analysis can be found on every hand. As brought out earlier, most of our physical suffering is due to our physical vulnerability, coupled with the biological emphasis on survival, which keeps us under constant attack by enemies great and small. A major part of our happiness is contingent on the largely fortuitous outcome of our efforts to avoid the continual perils of this nature, few of which have any moral implications whatever. Then, too, so much depends on decisions that we make in other than moral fields. An individual's choice of occupation, an economic decision, has a very important bearing on his happiness, and his choice of a wife, a social decision, even more so. Neither of these decisions is easily reversed, and the act of reversal, particularly in the latter case, is itself a source of unhappiness. Nor is it only these major matters that enter into a person's enjoyment of life. Almost every social or economic decision that he makes is a potential source of satisfaction or dissatisfaction. Even an unwanted shower of rain can dampen his spirits as well as his clothes. The mere fact that so much of our happiness depends on factors that have no moral significance is prima facie evidence that there is no moral significance in happiness per se or suffering per se. If we assign a moral value to happiness, then we are faced with the necessity of attributing morality to the agencies that increase or decrease it. We will have to treat the rainstorm as a destroyer of moral values, a patent absurdity. Thus, we come back to the conclusion that we have derived theoretically, that is, happiness is merely a feature of life in the physical universe. It has no metaphysical implications and is therefore morally neutral. It is a sector 2 biological objective that is not morally classifiable as either right or wrong. The entanglements in which the advocates of the various hedonist systems of ethics, he was talking about the utilitarians earlier, find themselves when they attempt to apply their calculus of pleasure to specific situations, likewise provide abundant evidence contradicting the basic premise of such a system. For instance, if there is no risk of detection, a strict application of the hedonist principle would indicate that a financially profitable, dishonest act should be judged right and good, inasmuch as it increases the satisfactions enjoyed by the individual concerned. It cannot be argued that there would be a feeling of guilt or remorse to offset the added pleasures, as no such emotion could be generated unless the action were judged wrong on the basis of some other ethical theory. Those who reject the extreme concepts of hedonism and adhere to a modified form of the theory, which takes the effect on others into account, and asserts that the right action is that which produces the greatest total of satisfaction or happiness, will point out that a dishonest act from which one individual profits will ordinarily result in a loss to someone else, and hence there will be no overall gain. But the validity of a theory cannot be judged on the basis of how well it applies in some cases. It does not necessarily follow that anyone will sustain a loss. The dishonest act may simply take advantage of an opportunity that would not otherwise be recognized at all. Even if the circumstances are such that some person does suffer a loss by reason of the act, the dishonest man may so handle the transaction that he makes a much larger gain. Indeed, the act may result in a distinct benefit to the community at large. In any of these cases, hedonism approves the dishonest act. The doctrine that the king can do no wrong has long since been abandoned. But here we find it replaced by the doctrine of the skillful manager can do no wrong. In these and many other instances of a similar nature, application of the hedonist or utilitarian theories arrives at the absurd result of judging dishonest actions as right and their results as good. The error here is that these ethical theories are trying to put economic values into the balance against moral values. There is only one moral element in any of the variations of the case under consideration. The dishonest act violates the moral code. It therefore has a negative moral value which cannot be counterbalanced by positive values of any other nature, economic or otherwise. The dishonesty can be justified only by showing, if that is possible, that in addition to the dishonest act, the act also has one or more morally correct aspects whose positive value is sufficient to outweigh the dishonesty. A very significant weakness of all theories based on maximizing happiness or satisfaction is that unless one aligns himself with the idea that everyone has a moral obligation to maximize his own satisfaction without regard to others, a position that few care to try to justify today, it is necessary to call upon some other moral principle to give the individual a reason why he should follow any moral code. There are those who argue that whatever advantages are gained by unethical conduct are merely transitory, and that moral conduct is in the long-run interest of the individual. Unfortunately, this brave statement is demonstrably false. It is quite true that a society in which no one followed the moral code would be definitely less satisfactory than one in which everyone complied with the code. But an individual is not faced with a choice between these two extremes. He lives in a society in which both courses of action are common, and he must choose his own path. In so doing, he has before him innumerable examples of individuals who habitually violate the code and prosper greatly by so doing, not only temporarily, but as long as they live. Whereas moral conduct seldom opens up the something-for-nothing opportunities that are exploited by those without moral scruples. So why should one embrace principles that restrain him and limit his freedom of action? It is often argued that social cooperation is an essential factor in human life, and that a moral code is required in order to make such cooperation feasible. Hence, compliance with the code is an obligation that one assumes as a participant in organized society. So far as the individual is concerned, however, this does not alter the situation. Such an obligation, if it exists, is still only a moral obligation. The presence of a vast number of persons who ignore the code is proof that it is not a physical requirement. And the advocates of the maximum happiness theory cannot give the skeptical person any logical reason why he should recognize any moral obligation. And then he quotes Bertrand Russell again. For each individual, the ideal community would be one in which everybody else is honest and he alone is a thief. The successful criminal may lead a very comfortable and happy life. Here is the greatest obstacle that stands in the way of those who, because they are unwilling to accept the moral edicts of the religious authorities, and because they doubt the validity of moral judgments reached by intuitive processes, have long sought to construct an ethical framework from factual foundations. They have arrived at a number of factual conclusions, such as the necessity of a certain amount of moral behavior in order to make social cooperation possible. but they have not been able to find a legitimate basis on which to make the required transition from such a statement of fact to a normative statement, from an is statement to an ought statement. And the general opinion at present is that such a transition is logically impossible. Knowledge cannot provide the form of ethics because it cannot provide directives, quoting Reichenbach. In as much as several modern schools of philosophy deny that anything can exist unless it is founded on empirical facts, this inability to construct an empirically based ethical theory has generated a strong tendency to minimize the significance of ethical principles. And then he looks at several other philosophers that weigh in on this. And then says, religious codes do not have this kind of a problem, as each come fully equipped with a directive that it must be obeyed. The religious assertion is that both the content of the moral code and the obligation of compliance are as they are because such is the will of God. The findings of this present work neither confirm nor deny this assertion, and they are of such a nature that they should be equally relevant whether or not one subscribes to the religious position. These findings define the objective of the moral code. They identify some key provisions of the code and provide methods by which the code can be developed in detail. And they identify the source from which the code originates. Now, in all three cases, he's really referring to Sector 3. The ethics of something is intuited from Sector 3 or other Sector 3 communications. All right, we'll talk to you tomorrow.